Hey everyone, it's Susan Jones and welcome back to my Sunday Spotlight. Today I want to talk to you a little bit about Reader's Workshop. So specifically I want to talk to you about why I love Reader's Workshop and some of the reasons that it worked really well for me as a teacher and my students in my classroom. So I know that Reader's Workshop can be a bit of a touchy subject sometimes, more like whenever a teacher is forced to do something in their classroom and they're not really given the freedom by their administration to pick and choose what works for their classroom, it can sometimes be a sticking point, and I totally understand that. And I have found over the years people that love Reader's Workshop, like myself, and others that just hate it. Like they just don't understand it, don't know why anybody would do it. They much prefer Daily 5 or their own literacy centers, or just not having to teach to a certain curriculum. So I'm going to explain some of the reasons I love it, and I will also let you know that when I'm talking about Reader's Workshop, I am not specifically talking about any person's set curriculum. I am more talking about the structure of Reader's Workshop, because when I did teach it in my classroom, I never had a specific curriculum to follow. So it's much more about the layout of my reading block and some of the philosophies behind it. So let's dive into why I love Reader's Workshop. Now, before I dive in, let me just let you know a little bit about why I happened upon Reader's Workshop and why I chose it for my classroom. Before I ever researched Reader's Workshop or really had much experience with it, I actually used literacy centers or Daily 5 in the classroom. So how that worked in my first grade classroom is I would do a read aloud lesson and I would have a particular skill that I was trying to teach with my book, and we would kind of practice it all whole group with my read aloud. And then students would either go ahead and do literacy centers or stations where I had a timer, and I did get it down by the end of the year in terms of like the chaos of it all and kind of switching. And our literacy centers, some would be reading based, some would be phonics based, some would even be writing based. So I liked that I could kind of fit it all into my schedule. And then the following year, that summer, Daily 5 was kind of like really big, and I bought the Daily 5 book, I read all about it, and I really wanted to implement it in my classroom. So I did, and it actually worked really well. I loved the kind of free flowing of it, and students could pick and choose what they wanted to do during that time. But it was that year, so this is my third year teaching, or my second year teaching, I don't remember, but it was during that time where I was doing really well with Daily 5 and I kind of really liked everything that was going on, that I walked into a second grade teacher's room. It was during my prep and I had to get something from her, and during the reading block, there were like second graders just spread out all across the classroom. They were all in their own little spots, and it was like silent. She was at the back table, she had a guided reading group going, and when you looked around, every single kid just had a book open. They were just enjoying their books. Nobody was talking. It wasn't loud. Everybody looked cozy and like they were really enjoying what they were reading. And I was like, what is this magic? What is this? I need to know. And so she told me she had done a lot of research on Reader's Workshop, and that is what she had been doing for the last 5-6 years at that point. So once she said that, I grabbed a few books and I started researching it a lot. Now, I was already very familiar with Writer's Workshop, so the format was pretty similar, and it is something that I knew I wanted to implement or at least try in my classroom the following year. So the layout of Reader's Workshop is the same every single day. It is a predictable format for both you and your students. So the first, let's say the first 5 minutes you're kind of reintroducing or reminding students what they learned yesterday and introducing the new skill of the day or whatever you're going to be focusing on during that guided lesson. Then you have another about 10 to 15 minutes, depending on your lesson, where you will go ahead and read aloud, and you will have a book to teach a specific skill. Now, you don't need to read the whole book, but you might read portions of the book where you're teaching something very specific, like inferring a character's feelings based on the illustrations, let's say. During that mini lesson is where you will go ahead and explicitly teach how to do what you're teaching them to do, and then you will have students practice, let's say with a turn and talk or some sort of way where they are sharing out their answers with either you or the other students on the rug, and you can hear them and kind of guide them as needed. After that is where the magic happens, and that is independent reading time. Just like in Writer's Workshop where you have independent writing, this is a block that's anywhere from 20 to 40 minutes, depending on how long your reading block is, where students just sit and read quietly. Now I know that sounds crazy, and I know it sounds like, no, also disclaimer, I have worked in 3 different schools. All 3 different schools were very, very different in terms of the makeup of my classrooms, in terms of where they came in their reading levels, in terms of socioeconomic status, in terms of everything. I cannot think of 3 more different school districts that I worked in. In all 3 of them, I used Reader's Workshop. And by the end of the year, all my kids, it was successful for all of them. Now, I know these are just my personal anecdotes, so take it with a grain of salt, but I found that when I really did the research and implemented it the way I wanted to, it was successful for all my students. In order to make that happen, you really have to look at where your students are with their reading levels and how you want to teach them to read during that independent reading time. So during that kind of 20 to 40 minutes, they might be looking over their books, they might be looking through the illustrations, you might give them some tasks to do during that time. Other times it's going to be just completely free where they can explore books at their own pace and really enjoy it. Also during that independent reading time is where you are going to pull your small groups. So I almost always do guided reading, but also during the beginning of the year, I would really pull that, and sometimes it would just be a specific phonics group that if my students are level A through C, let's say, and they're really not diving into reading just yet, this is where I'm spending a lot of focused time with them to help them blend those CVC words and help them recognize their letter names or letter sounds or meet them where they are at. Then at the end of independent reading is the closing, and that is where you will gather all your students back up because, like I said, they're probably spread out around the room. They have their own book bins. They are reading and enjoying it. You bring them back and kind of just discuss and review one more time what the specific skill was that you taught at the beginning of the class. You can ask if students were able to make any inferences from the illustrations of their own books during guided reading or during their reader's workshop, and they can share it with the class. That's kind of the general layout. I'll insert a little picture right here of the kind of steps for Reader's Workshop. After doing a ton of research and kind of trying it out in my own classroom, there are 3 benefits. There's actually a lot more benefits, but there's 3 that I really love about Reader's Workshop that I want to share with you. Number 1 is that it is way less prep. There are no papers required, which after doing years of literacy centers and even some of those daily 5 activities or maybe over at Phonics or whatever station they were at, the Work with Words station, I had to make sure it was constantly refilled. There's no prep to this. So every single day, I don't need to worry about if my copies are made or if something runs out over at station 2. I don't need to worry about any of that because all students need are their books. The second benefit is that it really fosters independence. Daily 5 did as well, where students could, go ahead and pick which station they wanted to go to of Daily 5 and kind of have it be a little free-flowing. But with Reader's Workshop, they are fully independent in terms of where they want to sit. They can choose what books they want to read. Now, I do have some guidelines I'll go over later about what my students keep in their book bins, but realistically, they have full reign over which books they choose to put in there. It also fosters independence where, the student is really in charge of their own learning during that reading block, and it's on them if they're reading or not. I mean, of course, I'm going to look around and I'm going to check in with students. I'm going to figure out ways that we can teach students how to build up their stamina, and that takes a lot of time. But it does work, and it gives them all that independence, and it just helps them really fall in love with reading. They're also independently reading at their own pace. If they have 6 books in their book bin and they are just obsessed with one book and they spend all 20 minutes reading it, that's totally fine. I don't need them to rush through all 6 books for any sort of reason. They can choose which ones they want to read. They can flip through one and say, I really don't like this book, and they can go exchange it for another one in the library. And the last benefit that I love about Reader's Workshop is that it's not assignment-based, meaning when students go off, while I am teaching a specific skill and I will ask them to go ahead and see if they can try it in their books, there's no need to kind of check up on students to see if they have done that. That reading time is really just their own independent time to fall in love with their books. It is not assignment-based like a basal curriculum might be, where everyone's reading the same book and then they're doing an assignment based off that book, or there's plenty of other popular reading curriculums where, again, it's like a book a week basically, and they kind of dive in and everybody reads one book and they have to do a vocabulary assignment, or the next day they're doing a craft and a writing assignment. Whatever it may be, there are benefits to all sorts of programs, but the one that I love about Reader's Workshop is that it is not assignment based, meaning everyone's working at their own level during that 20 to 25 minutes. Now, Reader's Workshop is a huge topic that really I could talk for hours and hours about and answer a ton of different questions about each of the different parts of Reader's Workshop. But another part I want to talk about today is that independent reading time and their book bins. So I'll insert a picture of what our book bins looked like in first grade. And now I got these bins on Really Good Stuff, I believe. But you don't need these bins. You can just use Ziploc bags. There's all sorts of other ways you can have students kind of collect their books. But those are their books until it is library shopping time or book shopping time where they can exchange them out. So in our student book bins, I would have them keep 6 books at a time. They would have 3 any choice books where they could pick whatever they wanted from our library, and they would have 3 just right books. Now, a just right book is something that we talk a lot about in my first grade class and what a just right book might look like. And it's basically for students to find a book that's on their level so they can learn how to decode the best they can. So I know I talk a lot about students getting their independence and that they get to choose these books, and they do. Never in my classroom am I like, hey, you're an A. You have to pick 3 books from the A bucket. That is not something I like to do. I've seen teachers do it in the past, and that's fine. That is not something I want to do. I don't want them ever to feel like they are labeled or kind of stuck by any sort of book. And also, I don't know about you, but if you could look at maybe 10 level C books, they're all very, very different. Some are way harder, some are way easier, and sometimes it's hard to kind of gauge where they really belong. So I teach students how to find their own just right books, and finding them and gathering them for their book bins is up to them. And it's not always going to be right, and that's totally fine. Also in their book, I like to keep a pencil and some sticky notes. Every once in a while, I will go ahead and give students an optional task if maybe we are looking for description words or sensory words in our texts. I can say, okay, when we go to independent reading, if you find any in your book, feel free to make a little note on a sticky note and mark it, and we can share at the end of Reader's Workshop. Now again, that sounds very much like an assignment that I said at the beginning. It's not assignment based, but it is optional. I never require my students to do that. And if it's something that I really need them to do, I will do it during my guided reading time, or I will pull them separately, and that's something we will work on. Again, that independent reading time is solely theirs. Lastly, I also include a poetry folder inside their Reader's Workshop buckets or their bins. Now, this is totally optional. It is something I have always done. Many of you know I always have my students do phonics poems. I'll put a couple pictures here of them. And that is something we kind of build upon and collect throughout the year. We have one each week. And those are poems that we have read together. We have read with partners. So students pretty much know the fluency of them. And I like to keep them in their bin. That way, if at any point in time they're bored with any of their books, I know that they also have their poetry folder that they can go ahead and read. Now, like I said before, there is a ton I could go into about Reader's Workshop, but instead of making this video extra long, what I went ahead and did is a couple years ago, I created a quick guide to Reader's Workshop where I share some of these benefits and I go a little more in depth about each part of the Reader's Workshop block. So I'm gonna go ahead and link that down below in my description. So if you want that guide, it's just a PDF, and it also includes a little video that I did where, and you don't have to watch it, it's up to you, it's about 45 minutes long, but it includes an old recorded webinar I did a couple summers ago if you're interested. But the PDF is also attached there, so if you want it, just fill out the form that is linked down in the description. So now I wanna know from you, do you do Reader's Workshop in your classroom? Do you hate it? Do you love it? What other questions do you have? Please leave me those questions down below. I will try to answer them as best as I can by responding to your comments. And if I get a lot of the same questions, I will go ahead and make another video kind of explaining a little bit more. But I do believe all teachers have the right to make their own decisions for their own classrooms because you guys know your students best. I just wanted to share some of the reasons I love Reader's Workshop. So if you like this video, please go ahead and give me a thumbs up so I know. Make sure you're subscribed to my channel and click that bell. That way you're notified of every new week's video. I'll see you next week. Bye. Welcome.